Darkness blanketed the neighborhood, broken only by the sporadic blinking of street lamps casting weak light on the empty street. One home on the edge of town sat completely still and quiet, but within those walls, a quiet turmoil was brewing. Under the dim light of a single bulb, vague silhouettes danced across the plaster, while voices rose in anger. This was far more than just a simple quarrel. The tension felt profound, intense, and unsettling, bordering on raw, animalistic rage. Suddenly, a deafening smash pierced the atmosphere, sounding like a heavy object hitting the drywall. Immediately after the distinct bang of a firearm rang out, the world seemed to freeze in that instant. Crushing quiet ensued, saturating the room much like a thick mist. The street outside was completely empty, without a person to be found. Nobody witnessed the event, but the weapon's sharp retort sliced through the night's calm, shattering it like a shard of crystal. Moments following the blast, the local authorities in Perth picked up a desperate dial to the emergency line. A female caller, trembling with sheer panic, stated that a gun had been fired and a person was injured. "He isn't moving at all." "Oh my God, please help," the lady screamed, her tone cracking with emotion. Dispatch immediately routed a squad car, and the cops arrived at the location in no time. Strobing lights revealed a female figure on the grass, visibly rattled. Her face had lost all color, her gaze was filled with horror, and she was shaking from head to toe. Chaos greeted the law enforcement agents once they entered the residence. Sprawled out in the family room was the corpse of 38-year-old James Watson. His limbs were twisted in a way that looked wrong. He stared blankly ahead, while a grim puddle of crimson began expanding over the floorboards.
The red liquid soaked into the rug, staining the decor and the plaster. Police immediately noticed clear indicators of a physical fight. Seats were toppled on their sides, and fresh damage was evident on both the furnishings and the vertical surfaces. The entire area was a mess, suggesting a brutal clash had occurred prior to the weapon being discharged. Next to the deceased was a shotgun, the muzzle pointing at the exit. Initially, it looked as if an intruder had raided the home. However, no locks or windows were broken. Patrolmen taped off the perimeter and summoned investigators and crime scene units to collect proof. It became obvious to the team that this wasn't just some chance offense. A much more complicated story was hidden here. The female found in the yard turned out to be Catherine Watson, the spouse of James. She was completely stunned, and the medics on site tried their best to calm her down. Red stains covered her palms, and she was too upset to articulate words. Once transported to the precinct, her only utterance was, "I didn't intend for this. I had no idea it would result in this." Detectives commenced their hunt for the truth. They started by interviewing the folks next door, yet nobody recalled any strange sounds prior to the blast. A local resident, an older gentleman called Mark Ridley, mentioned he spotted the couple arriving back at their place that night. The pair looked stressed, though he didn't give it much thought at the time. Officers took down his testimony, even though it failed to provide any major clues. At the same time, crime scene techs found mounting proof indoors, suggesting the fight started well before the shooting. Sitting on the dining counter was an unsealed packet. Contained within were a handful of papers and snapshots. Initially, they seemed unimportant, but after a better look, the detectives realized a few pictures depicted private family memories. Those photographs might very well be the secret to figuring out why this tragedy happened. Investigators strove to reconstruct the night's timeline. At approximately 8 p.m., the Watsons got back after an awkward meal out. Friends claimed the supper was strained, yet nothing hinted at the impending disaster. James eventually mentioned he had to go handle some business, but Catherine demanded he stay put. She informed him that there was a matter they had to talk over. Once back at the house, she proposed they relax with a beverage and have a low-key night. Leaving him in the den, she headed up the steps with the packet in hand. Seemingly oblivious to the storm brewing, the husband stayed on the ground floor. She finally descended the staircase, clutching the papers firmly while wearing a blank mask. Placing the folder on the surface before him, she waited for him to respond. He spotted the item and his demeanor changed instantly. He tried keeping his cool, but the atmosphere in the space was thick enough to cut. She remained silent, but her gaze said it all. A weighty quiet hung over them. That was the instant everything shifted. A fiery dispute erupted right then, quickly turning into a screaming battle. He tried to grab the folder at one stage, but she held on tight, unwilling to let go of the evidence. Scanning the room where the gun went off, officers spotted a smashed chair that looked like it had been wielded as a bludgeon. Documents and snapshots littered the ground with red stains smearing a number of the loose pages. Every clue pointed toward a violent tug-of-war between James and Catherine for control of those files. Police concluded the trigger was pulled right when James lunged to snatch an object out of Catherine's hands. Based on the carpet burns and where the 12-gauge landed, it was obvious Catherine was the one who took the shot. A forensic sweep of both cell phones brought a few curious facts to light for the investigation team. James's mobile had been powered down at 10:30 at night, a move that didn't fit his usual habits at all. Security video from the exterior showed James heading out near that hour and coming back just 10 minutes later. Where he went in that short window was anyone's guess. Catherine was a mess by the time they got her to the precinct, too shaken up to give a straight answer about the night's events. She claimed a verbal spat kicked things off, and somewhere along the line, the situation just went completely off the rails. She insisted her memory was blank regarding exactly how the firearm ended up in her grip. Officers could see she was breaking down, yet they had a gut feeling she was holding back. That prompted a deeper dive into the Watson marriage dynamic. They had a decade of marriage under their belts, 0 kids, and to the outside world, lived a pretty quiet existence. But folks next door mentioned James was barely around lately, a change that had clearly sparked some doubt in Catherine's mind. Nobody really understood the gritty details of what was going down behind their closed doors. Still, the icy vibes between them hadn't escaped the attention of their inner circle or the people living nearby. The probe uncovered that Catherine had reached out to a private eye only 7 days prior. Why she did it wasn't immediately obvious. She might have been digging up dirt on her spouse, though the specific target of her inquiry was still a big question mark. By the time night fell, the lab reports on the shotgun recovered from the house finally came across the desk. Forensics pulled James's prints from the barrel, but the placement was odd, suggesting he barely touched the thing. That detail made the cops ask a tough question. Was there a third party who actually fired the shot when it counted? Once the sun came up the next day, Perth officers headed back over to the Watson residence. Yellow tape still surrounded the property as CSIs bagged evidence, and detectives tried to piece the puzzle together. At first glance, it looked like a standard domestic dispute that flared up into sudden violence. Yet the specific facts were starting to poke holes in that straightforward theory. Lead detective Richard Hale chose to run back the security tapes one more time just to make sure he hadn't overlooked a clue. The clip confirmed James walking out at 10:30 at night and coming back shortly after, but a weird jump between frames caught the eye. You could see him chatting with an individual sitting inside a vehicle pulled up to the curb. The lens picked up a dark silhouette, but the resolution was too poor to make out the driver's face. Hale knew this could be the break they needed and started tracking down who might have been idling out front right then. Back at the station, the team grilled Catherine a second time, though she was clearly still hanging by a thread emotionally. She stuck to her story about blanking on the escalation, mumbling that it all flashed by in a blur while staring blankly at the wall. But Hale caught a flicker in her eyes when he brought up the sedan from the video, like she was scrambling to keep a lid on a secret. While that was happening, another team was carefully sifting through the stuff inside the manila envelope recovered from the floor. It turned out to be a stack of surveillance shots snapped by a hired professional. The glossy prints depicted James hanging out with a younger female, though her features were obscured in every single frame. The accompanying log listed their rendezvous points: a downtown Perth coffee shop, a mall garage, and a cheap motel on the city fringe. Oddly enough, the mystery woman's identity was completely absent from the written file. Hale figured Catherine paid the snoops to tail her hubby, yet connecting those snapshots to the murder was still a puzzle. The squad decided to pay a visit to the agency listed on the paperwork to get some answer. They tracked down the guy, Thomas Morgan, who looked pretty twitchy the second the badges walked through his door. Morgan admitted Catherine reached out a fortnight back, claiming her man was moving in a way that didn't sit right with her. She had a hunch he was stepping out on her, though she didn't offer up much more than that gut feeling. The PI laid out duplicates of the pictures he'd captured over a 7-day stakeout. You could plainly see James linking up with the girl, but she was always camera shy, turning her head or hiding under a hoodie. Morgan made it clear that he dropped the whole dossier in Catherine's lap exactly 24 hours before everything went south. Detective Hale circled back to Catherine and laid out the glossy snapshots the PI had snapped. She didn't bat an eye at the pictures, though she finally owned up to her gut feeling that James was stepping out on her. Her plan was to corner him with the proof during a family sit-down so they could hash out the truth and figure out if they still had a future. Even so, she swore up and down that hurting him was never part of the agenda. She claimed all hell broke loose the second James spotted the photos and started screaming about her snooping behind his back. According to her story, the shouting match turned into a wrestling match that ended with a bang, yet she drew a blank on the specific details. While the investigators tried to gauge if she was spinning a yarn, the lab report on the shotgun prints finally landed on their desk. Sure enough, James's fingerprints were all over the weapon, just as expected. The kicker was that the lab geeks confirmed those prints were stale, deposited way before the trigger was ever pulled. Catherine had stuck to her story about the piece being strictly for home defense and swore she never laid a finger on it. That claim didn't jive with the science, making the cops think someone wiped the weapon to throw them off the scent. That security tape showing James chatting with a mystery driver suddenly became the star witness of the investigation. Hale rushed the clip over to tech support to clean up the image, praying they could pull a tag number and ID the late-night visitor. With the video processing, the team started digging through the call logs and data history for both Catherine and James. They were hunting for breadcrumbs and found a trail of text sent from Catherine to her sister Lisa right as the drama was unfolding. Reading the actual words set off alarm bells because it sounded like someone trying to cover their tracks or make excuses. One text explicitly said she never intended for things to go that way, followed by a frantic plea to meet up. The fact that Lisa went radio silent and didn't text back really bothered Detective Hale. He hauled her into the precinct to squeeze her for info on that night, and she walked in looking like a deer in headlights. She admitted chatting with Catherine 24 hours prior, but denied making contact the evening the shooting went down. Lisa insisted their talk was just about a family barbecue and swore she was chilling at her own place the whole night. Her shaky hands and dodgy answers, however, told the detectives she was definitely hiding something. Hale made the call to subpoena her cellular data and ping her location history to see if her story held water. Just as they were grilling her, the tech lab finished scrubbing the security footage and sent over the finding. The plates on the sedan idling in the driveway came back registered to Lisa, which blew her alibi wide open. Hale switched gears instantly, hitting her with hardball questions about where exactly she was standing that night. She tried to dance around it initially, but once he applied the heat, she confessed she was parked out front when James walked out. Even with the confession, her version of events was about as clear as mud. She claimed she drove over to talk to her sister, but peeled out of there the moment she spotted James, never once leaving her vehicle. Hale smelled a rat, so he double-checked the logs and found a text from James demanding she get over there immediately on the night in question. That begged the question of why James would be reaching out to his sister-in-law when he was supposedly busy with his wife. It also made everyone wonder what kind of secret business the two of them needed to handle on the sly. Back at the lab, the crime scene unit stumbled upon another smoking gun that changed the whole game. They swabbed some blood off the bedroom door handle where the fight allegedly started, and it didn't belong to the husband or the wife. That clue suggested a third wheel crashed the party, and the DNA results confirmed the mystery donor was none other than Lisa. The detectives finally had hard evidence putting Lisa right inside the home, completely shattering her earlier denials. When the cops shoved the lab report in her face, she scrambled for a defense, claiming she only went inside to look out for Catherine. She explained that once the shouting match kicked off between the couple, she freaked out and tried to bolt. She swore she had zero part in the killing and had no clue who actually pulled the trigger that night. Her narrative was getting naughtier by the minute, leading the detectives to think the sisters were cooking up a cover story together. The working theory was that James's extracurricular activities might have sparked a war between the siblings themselves. With too many holes in the case to book her, Hale cut Lisa loose for the moment, but ordered her not to skip town. He could feel in his gut that they were inches away from cracking the whole thing wide open. They just needed that final puzzle piece to drop so they could see the full picture of what really went down. The next morning, Detective Richard Hale and his squad hit the Watson house again to tear the place apart for clues. Every fresh piece of evidence they dug up just proved this wasn't some run-of-the-mill felony. Hale had a gut feeling that this mess ran way deeper than a domestic spat that ended in a body bag. The officers combed through every single room a second time, hunting for any scrap of intel that could crack the case wide open. They took a long, hard look at the snapshots they had pulled out of that mystery envelope. The team bet the farm that the private investigator photos Catherine ordered were the key, but the woman's face in the shots was just a blurry mess they couldn't make out. That little detail threw a wrench in the gears since they couldn't put a name to the face. While the lab rats stayed busy, Hale decided to haul Lisa back in. Only this time, she was sitting there as a suspect, not just a witness. Lisa looked like she was about to jump out of her skin, but she agreed to play ball. Hale decided to quit dancing around and slapped the blood analysis from the door handle right down on the table. He grilled her on how her DNA got inside the house if she never left her ride. Lisa tried to spin another yarn, but nobody in the room was buying it. She tried to say she might have nicked herself walking in, but that story was full of holes. Hale saw he wasn't going to get anywhere by hammering her right then, so he decided to let her stew for a while. He knew in his bones she was holding back the juicy parts of this story. Back at the precinct, the team ran the logs on Lisa and James's phones. Turns out, James fired off a bunch of texts to her right before he bought the farm. One message screamed for her to get there immediately, and another dropped a pin for where they needed to meet. The text sounded frantic, telling Hale that James knew something bad was coming down the pipe. He told his crew to dig deeper into their history to see if this secret rendezvous thing was a habit. The squad also started scrubbing through James's emails and all his social media profiles. They stumbled onto a thread of direct messages between him and Lisa that went back a few weeks. In those chats, the two of them were hashing out some heavy moves that they needed to make pronto. It sounded like they were cooking something up, but the specifics were still pretty foggy. Hale figured James and Lisa were way closer than just in-laws. While the case picked up speed, Catherine was still a total basket case. The cops decided to take another run at her, hoping she could clear up the timeline of that night. Hale opened up by asking how she and Lisa got along, but Catherine clammed up the second her sister's name dropped. She admitted they used to be tight, but things had gone south over the last few months. She didn't spill all the tea, but she hinted that there was plenty of family drama that didn't even involve James. Seeing an opening, Hale pushed harder and asked if she had any clue that her husband was seeing her sister on the side. He flashed the texts from James's phone at her, but her face didn't twitch an inch. She swore she was in the dark about their meetups and insisted she thought he was cheating with some random stranger, not her own sister. Right then, Hale knew she was either totally clueless or she was putting on an Oscar-worthy performance to hide the truth. Changing gears, the squad decided it was time to toss Lisa's place. They snagged a warrant from the judge and headed over to her crib to see what they could find. While rifling through her stuff, they found a notebook loaded with scribbles about calls and meetups with James. The pages were packed with names and dates, including the Watson house. It proved Lisa wasn't just tracking him, she was probably plotting her next move. Hale started thinking Lisa was smack in the middle of this entire mess. Digging deeper, they uncovered a photo tucked away showing her and James cozying up at the beach. The shot looked fresh, and they looked way too comfortable together. That was the smoking gun they needed. It hit Hale that James and Lisa were definitely an item, something Catherine either missed completely or chose to turn a blind eye to. Back at the lab, the ballistics team finished working over the shotgun. The prints came back a match for Lisa, but they were layered over James's, which meant she grabbed the gun after he was already down. Hale figured she probably messed with the scene to throw the cops off the scent. Simultaneously, the team pulled security tapes from a hotel where James and Lisa had linked up. The footage caught them having a serious chat before Lisa walked out and left James standing there. Their body language was super close, just more proof of the affair Catherine never saw coming. It cemented the theory that those two were in deep, and their secret fling was the spark that set off the whole powder keg that night. Hale knew he didn't have a second to waste. He hauled Lisa back down to the precinct and laid it all out on the table: photos, surveillance clips, and the prints. She did her best to keep a poker face, but once the heat got turned up, her cool demeanor started cracking. Finally, she cracked and owned up to sneaking around with James, while Catherine was none the wiser. She claimed the fling started more than a year ago, swearing she never meant to wreck her sister's home life. They kept it under wraps until Catherine got suspicious of James's wandering eye and brought in a PI to dig up dirt. Hale leaned in, demanding to know exactly what they talked about that night. Lisa insisted James just wanted to figure out the best way to come clean to Catherine, but the whole situation went sideways fast. She admitted she showed up at the place, though she swore she hadn't planned on getting in the middle of anything. But the moment she heard the screaming, she ran inside and found Catherine and James locked in a physical fight. She said she tried to break it up, but she just couldn't get there before things went too far. The squad started checking her alibi, but everything pointed to Lisa being right there in the house when the shot went off. Security tapes, blood work, and latent prints all put her squarely at the scene. The big mystery was whether she jumped into the fray or just watched it happen, but Hale felt in his gut she was holding back the good stuff. While that was going on, the team started digging through the money trails for both James and Lisa. Turns out, right before everything went down, James wired a huge chunk of cash straight into Lisa's bank account. It looked like a payoff, but nobody could figure out what for, leading Hale to think Lisa was part of a bigger scheme, maybe even the mastermind. Later that night, the lab coats came through with a major break in the case. They dug up a cell phone registered to Lisa, stashed right under the mattress in the master bedroom. Once they cracked the passcode, they found a string of texts that proved their hunches were dead on. The pair had been plotting to fake an assault and pin the whole thing on Catherine. The text laid out the blueprint, but clearly the execution went off the rails. Hale knew right then and there that they had enough dirt to slap the cuffs on Lisa. He had her booked, and once she was in the box with nowhere to run, Lisa finally admitted there was a scheme in play. She tried to say James blackmailed her, threatening to air her dirty laundry if she didn't help him take Catherine out of the picture. Still, she stuck to her story that the gun going off was a fluke and she never meant for things to get that heavy. Hale could feel he was inches away from closing the file, but one nagging detail kept hanging over his head. If they cooked this up together, why did it fall apart? And whose finger was actually on the trigger when it counted? Detective Richard Hale felt like the picture was finally coming into focus, yet one burning question just wouldn't go away. Who really fired that shot, and why did their little plot blow up in their faces? The physical proof, and Lisa's own words, screamed conspiracy. Even so, the full story was still a bit murky. Back in the box, Lisa kept swearing up and down she had nothing to do with the actual killing and never wanted to hurt James. She tried to convince the cops that the whole idea was just to set up a scene, making it look like Catherine went after James. But once tempers flared, the whole thing just spun wildly out of their hands. She claimed that when the wrestling started, she just froze up, standing there without a clue of how to react. Hale took it all in, but his gut told him Lisa was still keeping some cards close to her chest. He made the call to go over the files one last time, hoping to piece together the timeline of that night step by step. The team headed back to the Watson residence, combing through the tapes and the scene again to make sure they hadn't missed a crumb. While giving the place a second look, forensics found a tiny detail on the shotgun that everyone had missed the first time around. They found a single hair trapped under the stock, and the lab confirmed it was a match for Catherine. That little detail stopped Hale in his tracks. Maybe Catherine actually had her hands on the weapon right before or after the blast. It made sense of her scattered story too. Maybe she honestly blanked on the details during the chaos of the moment. The detectives also took a hard look at Catherine's call logs from the minutes leading up to the incident. They saw that she had reached out to her PI and set up a sit-down for the very next morning. It proved she was dead serious about facing the music and making James pay for stepping out on her. But if she had her ducks in a row, why did the night end in a body bag? Hale figured it was time to take another look at what Catherine had to say. He needed to figure out if she was just a pawn or a player in this mess from the get-go. The questioning got intense, but Catherine stuck to her story about drawing a blank on the details. She recounted the shouting match with James and how he lunged for the envelope full of photos. Things spiraled out of control in a flash, and her memory just went completely black after that. Later on, the squad found a hidden camera in the living room that they had completely overlooked. James had set up the surveillance himself, a twist that blew the case wide open by capturing the fight. You couldn't see Lisa, but the audio picked up her voice, begging James to cool off and talk it out. Suddenly, James made a desperate grab to rip the package right out of Catherine's grip. She shoved him back, sparking a physical brawl where she clearly lost a handle on the chaos. He locked onto her wrists, and that was when Lisa rushed into the frame trying to break them apart. She wedged herself in the middle, but in the scuffle, she somehow wound up clutching the shotgun. It looked like she just wanted to calm things down, but the situation went south really fast. The tape showed Lisa aiming to spook him, but he jerked, and the gun tragically went off. Catherine hit the deck, while Lisa just stood there like a statue, still holding the smoking gun. She stared down at James's lifeless body for a few beats, her face warping into pure terror. Lisa dropped the barrel and bolted, leaving a shaking Catherine to dial 911 in a panic. Detective Hale finally had the full picture of exactly how that night went down in that room. Caught in the crossfire, Lisa fired that fatal shot in a blind panic without even thinking. Their entire scheme to fake an attack and frame Catherine had officially blown up in their faces. Fear took over when things boiled over, and that loss of control made the disaster inevitable. Hale wrapped up the investigation by slapping Lisa with a charge of involuntary manslaughter. She sobbed uncontrollably, swearing it was an accident, but the video proof didn't lie. Police acknowledged her fear, yet she held a deadly weapon and had the power to put it down. Catherine was left completely stunned when the reality of the situation finally hit her. It dawned on her that her own sister wasn't just a conspirator, but the actual killer. Even through her heartbreak, Catherine stepped up to help the authorities close the book. She handed over every scrap of proof needed to put this messy saga to rest for good. Lisa pleaded out and got slapped with a 6-year sentence for manslaughter and the conspiracy charge. Catherine packed her bags and left Perth, desperate to escape the nightmare that shattered her family. None of them could have predicted this twisted ending when they set things in motion. If this story hooked you, smash that like button and hit subscribe for daily true crime content. Catch you in the next one. Keep your eyes open and stay safe out there.
It was exactly midnight in Perth, Western Australia, on August 15th, 2020.